Mourinho shouts over to us. We were watching first team training session. He shouts over to us and goes, "I need a player to come and train." Out of nowhere, you're training with the best players in the world. I remember running at Lucio, and obviously my legs went to jelly. There's 15 minutes to go. We've won the game. He's chucked his shirt, spat on it, and threw it in the crowd. Yeah, the guy came in and said, "We're going to draw today." And I didn't really understand what was going on. And we actually did draw the game. Me and Vieira did an interview after that training session, and he was saying, "Look out for this player." And it's just the nice sort of stuff, because I had a good session. Megged him in the training session as well. So he was lucky that I got to meet a young Ronaldo that just had... He was at the advert for 4 hours, which is just unheard of.
So I usually open with sort of give me like a 30-second, I guess, summary of your footballing career. But I mean, looking at the topics that we've got to discuss here, I'll spare you that, and I'll just go in straight to Football's Most Wanted, I think it was called, the TV show that you obviously won. And
one will win a professional contract with Jose Mourinho's Inter Milan. Lovely ball through to Luis Figo.
To have a possibility of joining a club like Inter Milan, I think is a dream for them, and let them first of all enjoy, and after that fight for their dream.
Can Jamie Redknapp help find football's next star?
What you're probably most well known for. Could you give sort of a quick summary of what that competition actually was and why you got involved?
Yeah, so it was typically it was like a football X Factor, I guess, and at the time it wasn't a thing really. We'd had Football Icon in the past, but yeah, that was something where we sort of turned up as it was the Kent rep team we went as under Ken Brook, and we just turned up and sort of just had a bit of a training session, and I was lucky enough that Jamie Redknapp spotted me on the day and said, "Oh, I like him," and it just sort of went from there a little bit. It sort of took it in my path and didn't think anything of it at the time. I had a lot of other things going on. I think I was playing for like England schools, and Welling first team had just offered me a new contract where I was quite young, so I was like buzzing over that. And this other thing was just a little bit of a side thing until suddenly it became cameras. You're going to Italy. And it just obviously a little bit surreal, but then what came of it in the end was lucky enough that I won it.
You mentioned Jamie Redknapp there. I was watching a few clips of it this morning just to gauge a little bit, because I must have been like 5 or 6 at the time that it was actually sort of running. Not to make you feel old or anything, but how important do you think Jamie was in you sort of going as far as you did in the show? Because it seemed to me, at least, that he did or it came across that he had sort of like a soft spot for you.
Yeah, I think he did. And I think other players noticed that as well. Because when we went into the final 40, which was at Watford, he come up and spoke to me, whereas the other boys were more like, "Look, it's Jamie Redknapp." I'd been speaking to him over the phone about what to do. Welling were trying to tie me down. Should I sign this? Should I sign that? And at the time, I didn't sign those sort of things. So it was, he was, it was, and it probably gave me that confidence to go, you know what? He's not doing this to everyone. He's doing this to me at the moment. So made me feel a little bit more wanted and thinking I'm sort of probably the one to look out for now.
Yeah. And unless we did, I think just to make it clear, the prize of the competition for the winner, which Ben obviously won, was a 6-month contract at Inter. But in the sort of process, you were training with the youth teams of Milan, if I'm right. What was that like? The sort of initial impressions of like the whole Milan setup?
Yeah, I'll be honest. It's not as amazing as what the English stuff is. They're quite. It's just generally the way the Italians are. They hold the same lifestyle. When you go out to Italy, it's a lot more old-fashioned. We're used to all these like gimmicks and things like that, and massive, unbelievable pitches. Where Inter keep it quite simple, and like they've got their youth training camp, which is good. There's no denying it's good, but it's not like if you were to then come over to Manchester United or Man City, see what the standard of their pitches and stuff that they've got going for them. But at the same time, we actually stayed on the campus, the boys. So I think there was about 14, 15 of us that would stay there, and we had rooms there and things, and it made it a lot easier because obviously you're literally waking up and you're going downstairs to train. and we had a little local restaurant that gave us food all the time that we were sort of 5-minute walk away from. So it was all quite comfortable and quite an easy way of living. I think I always said it was harder training with the youth teams than whenever you're training with the first team, because first team is more the youth teams and the reserves. Because I was mainly in the reserves throughout the whole process. It was quite cutthroat. It was like people were desperate to, because at the end of the day, only one's trained with the first team next week, or one might only be one that gets a deal. So it's a lot more of a cutthroat business. Whereas when they're in the first team, they've all got their deals. They're a little bit more relaxed. They're playing for the sake of playing. Some of them know they're not going to play. Some of them know they are. They're all at different points in their career, whereas everyone was desperate to make it. So I think that was probably the hardest training sessions.
That's really interesting. I mean, relaxed probably isn't the first word you associate with a Champions League, like sort of winning side. But you know, you mentioned the sort of competition there. And I wanted to ask, like, between obviously as the numbers came down between you guys competing for that obviously prize that can only go to one of you, how did you sort of balance the sort of camaraderie, if you like, between you whilst also competing against each other?
Yeah, it's funny because I think when I look at things like X Factor and reality TV shows, and you think they can't be good mates, there's going to be one winner. I sort of disagree with it now after having been through it. I think it was more of a case of you just want to make next week. We all, at the end of the day, everyone wanted to win it, but you weren't thinking about winning it until it was the final two. So then it was only one that were ever thinking about what might happen if we win it. And there wasn't that rivalry. We were both with different players, very different players. So I think we could have both handled if the other person won it. But I think realistically it was like every week it was more just staying for next week, and then someone goes, you're gutted to see him go, but you weren't thinking at the time like you're my enemy, because you sort of just fancy your chances. Like when there's 10 of you and 9 of you are going through, you don't really sort of look into it. And obviously there was a danger zone, and that's when it became a bit more, look, you're playing for yourself. But I think because of different positions, I do think it balanced itself out in terms of, for me, throughout the process, because I think when I was in the danger zone, I was with a striker and I was with a centre-half, Gavin and Hisham. So it was different. Maybe me and Hisham, you could say you didn't link up in the game. We did, but you know what I mean? So if you were to be that cutthroat, I'm not going to pass to him because I'm going to make myself better. But the coaches, they're proper coaches, so that they know what they're doing. If you're suddenly not passing to someone, they're going to think that's a negative. So there actually wasn't any of that. And we were a really good bunch, to be fair. And obviously, I think as it cut down on things, you'd been together longer, so it was harder to more say goodbye. And I don't really think any of us were thinking about what was going to happen until probably for me that it did happen. I don't think throughout it you're thinking, yeah, I'm going to win this Inter Milan contract. You were just like, next process, next week, let's go again. And sort of took it week by week.
So you mentioned that you were taking it sort of week by week. When was the point that you realised, or it sort of sunk in that, all right, I could actually have a chance of winning this?
I think it was actually early on. I think it was in week 2, they show a thing on the show where Mourinho shouts over to us. We were watching first team training session. He shouts over to us and goes, I need a player to come and train.
Really?
And what happens on the show is it was exactly how it happened in real life. Gavin sprints over and just joins in. Like nobody even sort of acknowledged what had happened. Gavin just sprinted straight off and jumped straight. The reason I then had a bit more about myself was because of the fact when Gavin came out the session, Marco then sent me over and went, Ben, you go over now and join in. So it was more like you've been chosen out of these sort of 9 people that are left. So that made me think through it. And I think I probably became the one to beat from there on. But I do think the whole way through it probably was between me and Craig, and then Connor was sort of a bit of a dark horse throughout. So it was always just going to be whatever they preferred, whatever they chose. And I think looking back on it, I think you can see from the show, I was just more ready for Italian, maybe football, but also just Italian lifestyle. See that I was someone that could probably jump into a professional fit in Italy. And I think that's probably why they went with it.
Why do you think that was? What about the Italian game suited you so much?
I think it's easy, and it's something that I know now more as a coach. It's easy to take on a player that just wants to get at players. You can take a lot of gambles on wingers. And I think if you look into every pre-season you go to, there's probably the most filled position on the pitch is wingers, because you don't know how good they're going to be. You've seen something about them that could be unbelievable, and you take probably more gambles on wingers, whereas centre mids and things, you see more of them, you know what they can do, so you sort of made your mind up on them a little bit quicker. Whereas it could just be someone that's like, right, well, if he doesn't fit in, he can come off the bench for 30 minutes and change the game completely. So I think every team is always wanting a lively winger. So I think positional sense, but also I do just think watching the show, looking back on it, and I think the way that I was probably more adaptable to living in Italy. I think Craig would have struggled. And I think in the end, I think Connor admitted he was a year younger than me, Connor. So I think just that extra year, I think Connor would have struggled as well. So I think they probably chose the person that was most adaptable to living in Italy, but also looking at the show and the way things went on the show, I think I was definitely up there as one of the better players. So I think they've taken that into account as well.
You mentioned your first training session there. I was under the impression that I think it was like one of the last episodes when it was just the two of you going in. That was your first. But how was that actually, just being sort of thrown into the deep end?
First one, really nerve-wracking. Probably the most nervous I've ever been in terms of touching the ball, because obviously you're just out of nowhere. You're training with the best players in the world. I remember running at Lucio, and obviously my legs went to jelly. And I remember just trying to keep the ball, which I was doing, but I reckon looking back on it, I probably didn't look as good as what I could have done, because it's just more thinking, keep the ball, don't embarrass yourself. You're playing with world-class footballers, so you don't want to show yourself up here, and you obviously don't know your own level at that time because you've never experienced anything like that. So I think that's where I was a little bit. But the second time round, like you said on the show, a lot more relaxed, done it before. So you was more like, you know what, I've had that moment, I've got over that, I'm now going to show them what I can do. And biggest name drop of it all was the one that helped us out the most was Patrick Vieira. He literally had his arm around us, and I'm gutted because I'll never see the footage. But to this day, there was me and Vieira did an interview after that training session, and he was saying, look out for this player. And it's just the nice sort of stuff, because I had a good session, megged him in the training session as well. So he was laughing about it. Me, him and Jamie Redknapp on camera. And I was just a bit gutted, just because that's something that you can look back to and be like, how amazing was that? You're playing with and training in, and you've got one of the best players in the world saying that well in a session and things. So a little bit gutted that they never aired that, but that's definitely something that I'll definitely look back upon.
Few names chucked out there. Who was the best player?
Other than Vieira, I think he was a bit past it, because he actually, if you look back at the stats that year, he didn't play that much. But it was Zanetti, and he keeps popping up on my timeline now, just from like old runs and things. If you look at the way that he could drive with the ball from right back, and just no one could tackle him. And I think at the time he was 38, and he's won the treble with Inter Milan as captain, and he literally was the fittest player in the team. He was just unstoppable. And it's not often that you see a defender be able to run with a ball like that, and you just couldn't tackle him. But also like a model pro as well. So he was the one for me that was really, because obviously I think we're quite proud in England that we watch footballers in England. He wasn't someone that you'd know much about at the time, other than it's Zanetti, big name, but you wouldn't really know much about him. And he was something that really shocked me. Like, hey, this guy is absolutely unbelievable, and probably for me the best fullback the game's ever seen.
Would you say he's the best player you've ever played with then?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I think I'd always say that, just because you could drop other names and say like how good was like, even at the time, Balotelli, and like
we'll get onto him.
Yeah, because even he was playing with us at times. But obviously there was big names in that era. But for me, he's someone that's probably goes under the radar in terms of players. And for me, I just don't know. I know there's unbelievable fullbacks out there ever, but I don't know how someone could be better than him. That's where my opinion's at.
So, Balotelli, I know you've got a few stories to share about him.
Yeah, yeah, very strange, because I think he's only 2 years above me. So obviously, while I was out there, I think he was only 19, 20, and he was like veteran pro the way he was acting. But I think it's killed him in his career because managers now, it's not worth the hassle. I think Mancini at Man City, it was worth the hassle because he was a top quality player. But now that he drops his standards, it's then what's the point of having him about if he's going to do what he does? I think probably the best story in terms of what he was doing, he was going about in Milan in an AC Milan kit, just getting everyone to take photos while he's playing for Inter. So that, and everyone knows the rivalry of Inter and AC. It's a bad rivalry. Mm-hmm. That's just like something that you can't do. And he was happily going about gloating about it. But I think the one thing where you can see where he never progressed was he came on in the semi-final of the Champions League with 15 minutes to go. I think it was against Barcelona. I think it was at home. I think it was at San Siro. Yeah, at the San Siro. And there's 15 minutes to go. We've won the game. He's chucked his shirt, spat on it, and threw it in the crowd. They've gone into the Champions League final. He's 20 years old, played 15 minutes. Any 20-year-old normally would be buzzing. You're going to the Champions League final. You might be gutted that you didn't start, but you've still got the opportunity to come off the bench and your team's in a Champions League final. And he's absolutely thrown his toys at the pram and stormed off the pitch. And you're just thinking, this is why he never got somewhere, because he just had that. It was like, I have to play now. And there's plenty of players that do that. We deal with a lot of players within the academy that do that. So who probably think they're a bit ahead of themselves now. That's one thing I think we're quite good at managing, trying to keep their levels right and sort of let them talk once they deserve to be able to talk. I think that's the biggest thing. And I think Balotelli just got a little bit ahead of himself, really. And it's a shame because he was a world-class player as well.
Yeah, and you always hear coaches bang on about attitude. That's a very real-life example for you. I mean, there's probably to the more extreme scale, but I mean, I always think about the clip of him. I'm not sure if you've seen it in, I think, pre-season for Man City. He's through on goal and he tries to turn around and do like a back heel finish, misses and gets taken off. But another player I wanted to ask about was Quaresma, because you always hear this sort of thing that he was higher rated than Ronaldo as a teenager. What was he like as a player?
Yeah, it was a strange one because he didn't play. And there must have been something up. And this is where I try and tell people within football that people from an outside point of view don't understand it. Sometimes something can happen, whether it's between the manager, between a player, between an agent, between something, chairman, something can happen and it can completely spoil that player's spell at that club. And I mean, I've even had it at certain clubs where you haven't been paid and that sort of suddenly they start dropping you because you haven't been paid and things, and they know you're going to kick up a fuss and you're not going to play to your best ability because you haven't been paid and maybe others have. There's been times where I've experienced things like that, obviously not to the level of what was going on with Quaresma. And I never, to this day, I never really knew what it was because Mourinho's Portuguese, Quaresma's Portuguese. You would have thought there was a connection, but you could just see it was Quaresma knew what he was there for and it was never to be involved. And it was good for us because I'd trained with Quaresma quite a lot, because obviously when it's the boys that aren't involved in the first team squad ever, they come and train with the reserves. So he was training with us quite a lot and his ability was unbelievable. Like, he should have been in that team all day long. But probably looking at it, we all know what Mourinho's like. He wants his hard-working teams. He wants players to do what he wants them to do. And maybe Quaresma was someone that wasn't going to do that. So that might be why it didn't work out for him. But yeah, I mean, if you actually look at it, he probably went 5 years later down the line until he started actually kicking on with his career. And by that time, he was like 31, 32, which is strange because ability-wise, yeah, he was unbelievable. And he was doing that in training, but probably similar, not to the same level, but to sort of Eden Hazard, really. Like, I think we could all say Hazard should have been the best player in the world, but there's just something not there. And I think at the end of the day, they are humans, aren't they? Yeah. I think we all expect him to have that Ronaldo attitude. But the truth is, some of them maybe don't want it. Some of them are happy. Like, there'll be a lot of people in life, if you said to them, do you want 100 grand a week just to train every single day and never play a game of football? They'd say yes. So there are certain people that maybe just want that lifestyle and are happy with that lifestyle and not fussed in having a career themselves. Maybe there was something up. There was definitely something up, but it was good for me because I got to experience playing with them all the time.
Yeah. Um, I wanted to ask about how the squad sort of received you coming in to train with them like every day, if you know what I mean, because you described it as a sort of X factor. So these are established international footballers, and you've got this guy coming in from England, young. He's coming in off the back of a TV show. Uh, how did they sort of receive you?
I think that like I said, the reserves, they're never going to receive you in a way like, oh, brilliant to have you in, because they see you as a position. So the reserve side of things, it was always going to be, it was never any malice, but you know what I mean? It's like, as another one to compete with. I've got to compete with them. First team, absolutely fine. But to be honest, I don't think any of them really knew, because it only aired in England. And these were sort of, I know it was only sort of 10, 11, 12 years ago when it happened, but these were times when we wouldn't watch foreign football, and it's Italian leagues wouldn't watch foreign football like English football. So it was a case of we were all stuck in our own ways. And it probably wasn't a time where things that were getting aired in England were coming to Italy. So it was a strange one, because even that's one thing I say was probably the hardest thing for me when I came back over, was I'd been out in Italy for 2 years, but nobody watched Italian football in England. I always wanted to come back to England, but it was all managers then ringing me up saying, oh, how's your 2 years gone? Whereas really now, you'd know about it. You'd know, obviously, we hear today of like Tomori and Abraham going over to Serie A and smashing it. But at the time I was playing in Serie C, and there would be those links now. There's plenty of people that are watching all the lower leagues in Italian and German and French football. And I think it was just at that time that they weren't doing it. They weren't bothered. They were focused on England, bring players in from England, and it just proves how far recruitment's come.
That's really interesting. You've probably been asked this about a trillion times, but what was Mourinho like?
Yeah, I got to see the best of him. I think obviously that was the peak of his career. So players just were in awe of him. Walking down the corridors, you just were like, everyone smiling, like happy, all wanted to work for him. And I think that's where, like we said before, there were probably 5 or 6 players that didn't, and he just ushered them out. And it's another thing, like we said, you forget about them players at a club that have just been ushered out and left out, and they are literally done that, so they're not involved with the others. But he was absolutely brilliant at the time, because it was all going so well. He had his charismatic side on the cameras, everybody buying into him, all the fans loving him. And he was good for us, because you could imagine that he'd be someone that wouldn't have time for you, but he'd have time. He'd always stop, hello, he'd always say, how's it going? He'd always say, just keep your passion up there no matter what's going on. He was quite realistic. He wasn't someone going, oh yeah, I'm going to get you in the first team, because we knew that at the moment they're world champions. They've won the Super World Cup. They've won the Champions League. You know, I mean, they've done it all. They've literally won everything that they could have won that year. So we're absolutely miles off it. It was actually the following year when Benitez came in that suddenly everybody was getting a chance, because it. So you know, when you're miles behind in terms of they're smashing it, you know where you're sitting in the reserves, and you're happy. And he wasn't giving any sort of false hope to anyone, and he was just brilliant. He'd always come down and watch and say, that was good, well done today. And I think that's all you needed, just a bit of positive sort of advice from him coming in as a first team manager that we've all seen, especially me myself growing up, seeing him in the Premier League. It was obviously something that you everything he said, you just took on board.
And you must have, obviously being a coach now yourself, like it's not many people better that you can learn from. Like you must have picked up a few things from him.
I think the biggest thing I picked up was that respect. And that's one thing that I've never gone and demanded respect. But if there's someone that doesn't have respect for you, then there's no point in coaching them. If there's ever that level where people are going above and beyond something that you'd want them to do, then it's not saying you're better than them or demanding power. I'd never be someone that would scream and shout power and sort of use my position in that sort of way. If you didn't get the respect, it's not going to work. It's just that's the way I'd leave it. Is if you're not going to get respect out of me and you want me to coach you to get you better, then that relationship doesn't work. So I think that's the biggest thing. It was always, for me, trying to get that level. And I think that's something that I've done quite well at over the years. And I'd imagine that was from him.
Definitely. Well, I mean, the few games that I played with you, I think that definitely comes across because I played under managers that will just shout at you and
Yeah.
get on your back. But I can definitely see that coming across, and I think that's translated into players that now play under you being able to sort of express themselves. I think that's a very important trait for managers to have.
I think that's I think the one thing that is what obviously I've had other managers as well, and you just don't want to be the managers that are screaming and shouting, making it a negative. There are certain players, the certain players that I coach nowadays that we've worked out. You do have to go get on their backs, not like horrible, but you have to shout and then go, "Come on, need more from you." There's certain players that you have to, and there's certain players you can't say anything like that to at all because their performance just drops. And I think that's what I found. I've had coaches who've worked with me in the past who have probably gone beyond that level and they're just using their position of power to shout at players and be like, why are we losing 3-0 and just scream and shout. Sometimes you need it, but sometimes you probably need someone who's actually going to be more constructive with things and get them back on the right way, especially with younger players. Because even if adults can't take someone shouting at them, as a young guy, you don't want to sort of demoralize them. You want to actually get them and progress them as much as you can.
I wanted to talk about obviously the Champions League final, and you were in the squad for that. Tell me just what is that experience like?
Yeah, I mean, it was even. I think the run up was probably even bigger because Chelsea quarter final. Like I said, like Chelsea, I'm watching Frank Lampard play and things, and you're obviously, when you're out the squad, you're right behind the dugout. You're right involved in it. You see everything that's going on between both benches. You feel a part of it. And just seeing Frank Lampard and you're thinking, this is a player that I've watched, grown up, supporting him for England. All these players that are just suddenly out there playing against against players that you get the chance to train with day in, day out. So that, and then Barcelona, like we said, seeing Lionel Messi and things come down and play. And then obviously comes down to, I think the final in itself was a bit of an anticlimax that year because Inter and Bayern Munich weren't the two biggest teams in European football. Barcelona, for a start, were, Real Madrid were, and then a couple of English clubs at the time was maybe Man United and things. So it was a bit of a strange final. But the biggest thing was being at the Bernabeu. That's what I was more amazed by. We actually played a game a few days before the final against Bayern Munich under-19s. And we won that one 2-0. And that was at Real Madrid City, where they do a lot of their open training sessions in their sort of mini stadium that they've got. Yeah. So that in itself was like an unbelievable experience to be playing against Bayern Munich under-19s, to be winning that game and then going on to travel with a squad and just sort of be amongst what was going on. And that was just absolutely crazy with the whole side of things, it being Champions League. But I think the strangest thing now, and it's something I was always good at and always have been good at, is didn't really let it faze me. I wasn't like, wow, this is, you know what I mean? I could be someone that was, I think if I was to go back and do it now, if I got the option now, I'd be like a fanboy walking out the tunnel or something like that and just absolutely in awe of everything that was going on. But I think then it was normal. It was a real thing. You would, like I said, you were training with these players, so they didn't seem like the sort of the heroes that you sort of set them up to be throughout your whole life. But in terms of the game itself, it was a typical Mourinho game. Two breaks, Diego Milito, both goals. And it looked like Mourinho basically sussed Champions League football that year. So I think it was more of a Mourinho win.
Mm. And heard you got yourself a medal as well.
Yeah, I can't say I deserved that, but it's funny how many they've got lying about. And also, at the same time, like we were saying before, there's so many players like Quaresma, other players. I can't really remember some of them to this day, but who weren't involved and weren't there because they weren't involved. So that's sort of the mentality. So we were lucky that we're sort of taking the medals that were probably theirs and just getting that opportunity to be a part of it and take something home for it.
Definitely. So you mentioned people being left out. I was curious, is there ever any part of you which is like, could I have got an appearance 20 minutes off the bench in a cup match?
Do you know what? I'll be honest. Following year, yes, 100%. And because obviously the way that year went and the way that any proper clubs work, they signed me again and they went, we've got to get you on loan because that's normal. I'm not going to get in the first team because this is Inter Milan we're talking about. But what was crazy that year is Benitez came in and so many players didn't want to play for him. There were actually players that refused to play for him that had played for Mourinho. There were players that wanted to leave and go to Madrid with Mourinho or go off to, like Maicon went off to Man City. And so many players were just wanted out. Maybe also there were quite a lot of them that were towards the end of their serious time in their career. So they're thinking, I can't do this another year. How can I compete with winning the treble last year? I don't want to have to go again and grind it out, and I'm not gonna top what happened last year. So we ended up having about 4 or 5 players who were in the reserves who got appearances that year. So I do think if I hadn't have gone on loan to, even though going on loan to Como was the best thing I did in Italy, but if I hadn't have gone on loan to Como, you never know. You might be one of them players that went, well, come sit on the bench at least. And then lucky enough that you come on. It was actually my roommate, Alibet Dennis, who probably played about 5 or 6 games for Inter. And then the boy that was across me was Christian Baraghi. And I think he's still playing in Serie B, sort of Serie A now. And he got the opportunity. And it was actually quite funny. He's a left back. And to this, he was never anything special at all. But he scored a 40-yard goal. He came on, I think it was in the Champions League, came on 15 minutes, scored a 40-yard goal. And at the end of the day, if you're doing that for Inter Milan, that's your career made. So a little bit, because obviously when people say, did you play for Inter Milan? I'm like, well, yeah, I did play for Inter Milan. Did you play any first team fixtures? No. It doesn't bother me because at the end of the day, it's Inter Milan. If do you know what I mean? If it was, I've played for Leyton Orient and then someone said, have you played any first team games for Leyton Orient? I went, no. And then I'll be a bit more like, well, you haven't really been a Leyton Orient player. But when you're just using the name Inter Milan, I'm not bothered what anyone says because it is one of the top clubs in the world. So whether it is or isn't what I've done and whether people say whatever, that experience in itself is just something that I don't think I could beat.
100%. I was going to say, maybe if they've seen a few of your free kicks from Margate, then maybe you would have got maybe another chance.
I'm sure I'll be able to take the free kick off Wesley Schneider.
So, yeah, you touched on your time in Serie C at Calcio Como, I think it's called. And I heard there was a bit of a match fixing sort of thing going on there. Do you want to quickly touch on that?
Yeah, I was only having this chat the other day with I was on holiday talking to an Italian and he was a Juventus fan. This was the same time Juventus got relegated for it. The guy came in and said we're going to draw today, and I didn't really understand what was going on, and we actually did draw the game, and I actually scored in it. But I'm looking back thinking, did we then fix it and let in another goal? Don't know the truth behind it. I don't know whether everyone was completely on it, but at the same time, probably it's quite easy to fix a draw because it's one of the most likely results if it's quite an even game. But yeah, they were really on it. They were doing everything in terms of betting. I think it probably is still going on. I'm not saying that's just Italians. It's just the Italians got caught for it. Whereas I imagine it is going on in a lot of countries and a lot of places. I mean, even in non-league, I remember when I first started non-league, there used to be a bet on Bet365, which was first throwing. And obviously, how many clubs set the ball back and pump it into the channel from the first ball? And it used to be clubs would just kick it out.
Really?
All bet on the other teams to throw. You can make it look obvious, and they're just pumping it sort of just into the stands, a little bit over here, and then people have put money on that. I've had a lot of people say, do you know any dodgy goalkeepers that are willing to take money? Because at the end of the day, a goalie can match fix any game. I think I've probably played with a few of them, or they're just absolutely useless. But it's crazy that there's obviously people that want to make money out of football in their own way. Hopefully it never properly creeps into the game. But I do agree I can't say I agree with the rules about stopping us from betting on the Premier League. I don't know how we could have an influence.
A non-league player is not allowed to.
Yeah, non-league player is not allowed to bet, which is crazy in itself. Because I mean, at the end of the day, Harry Maguire's mate, who's not a footballer, is going to know more about what's happening at Man United than us. So they're the sort of stuff that I can't really get. I don't know how we could influence that, but I'd understand betting on your own league, maybe leagues around you, because you might know a bit more about it. But what's the harm in telling someone a bit of advice and then betting it? I just can't quite work it out. I think the whole betting aspect in football just isn't done properly, and most importantly, shouldn't be advertised. from players that aren't allowed to bet themselves. Even we've worn sort of betting logos before in warm-ups, and it's just like, well, we can't even bet ourselves, so why are we advertising that? And obviously I know there's all the fuss going on now, isn't there, about players doing it at Newcastle and things like that, but it is something that it's something that doesn't make sense, so it's a strange one.
Definitely. Moving back to Inter, I heard or I read this morning that Redknapp, who we were touching on earlier, basically you heard or had a discussion with him that you would have got a 2-year contract at Tottenham had you not won or taken that contract at Milan. Looking back on it, do you regret doing that with that in the back of your mind, or wasn't a thing you could pass on?
I don't think I can ever regret, because I think I'd always do that decision again. Not in hindsight as much. I think you probably would go back and tell yourself, do the Tottenham thing, but you've just won a TV show. You're offered a 6-month deal at Inter Milan. You've been in Italy for 6-7 weeks. You've been training with Vieira. You've seen Mourinho. Do you know what I mean? It would be silly to go, actually, I'm not going to do this. So you've always got to give it the opportunity. So there's no regret, because I don't feel like there was anything ever really that you could suddenly say, do this, because I was so engrossed in what was going on there. But yeah, I think obviously to prolong my career in England, definitely, yeah, because if you've been at Tottenham for 2 years, your next loan is the Championship League One. Whereas I was coming out of Italy, and the Championship League One clubs, Brighton took me in, but they weren't really looking at me because they hadn't seen me for 2 years, as we were saying earlier. So if you'd been at Tottenham, you would have been watched, you would have been seen in academy games, or seen in under 23 games, or even if you got an opportunity in the first team, your name would have been shouted about it. So much easier to make it in England. But then at the same time, if I didn't choose to come back to England, I imagine I could have had a very good career in Italy, because I was doing well for Como. So it's something that I just 2 years down the line made a decision and went, I want to play in England. I understand it's going to be a lot harder now. But I prefer to live in England, prefer to be back this way, which is, I think, a normal thing that I would do again. But yeah, like we said, obviously having more of Redknapp's back in would have helped. There's no denying that. But I still speak to him to this day. I've still got him on Instagram and things. So it's still all good. And it's still one of them. But it's just, I don't think you can ever look back on anyone's on your own football career and go, if I only did this, because there's so many factors that can happen. At the end of that, all it takes is one manager to say you're a terrible footballer and you have to drop down 2 leagues or whatever. It's just the way football is. It's a game of opinions, and it's a team game. If it was an individual sport and all you had to do is go out there and, like we said, score a free kick or something like that, you'd be all right. But when it comes down to actually, it has to be someone's opinion to play you. It has to be that team to play with you. There's so many factors and aspects that can alter that.
That is really something that I wanted to touch on, in terms of, we've been talking about how there wasn't as much sort of a awareness in England and the vice versa in Italy of each other at the time. So was it a bit surprising that coming out of Inter Milan, coming out of training with these players that, I mean, you went to Brighton, but then soon after went to Welling and Ebbsfleet, if I'm correct. So was it a bit surprising you didn't get anything a bit higher up?
I think at the time, yeah, I was surprised. Definitely was surprised. But it was another one. When I went into Brighton, they were top of League One by an absolute mile. So it's probably one of them that I'd say, when you're young, and it's sort of what happened with me at Welling originally, you're better off being at a club that isn't pushing for top of the league or isn't absolutely scrapping for relegation. You're better off being at a mid-table club that can offer you them appearances. It's something that we say to our Dartford boys every year, our academy boys. We know, as much as we think some of them might be good enough to get the opportunity, we know it's a lot harder to give those players an opportunity when you're looking to try and almost win the league or be within the playoffs every single season. Whereas if it was a club like when I was at Concord Rangers, who's a club that's more about bringing players through, because their ambition isn't to go and win the league. They'd love to get playoffs. They'd be overachieving if they did. They'd know that. But at the same time, they're giving out opportunities, and it just depends what club you're at. And I think probably it was a bad idea going to Brighton. I thought it was brilliant because they were on like 90 points and things like that in League One. So it looked like I was going to a championship club at the time. But really, they're then looking to progress even more. So I think it would have been better off if I'd have gone to somewhere that might have been able to offer me the game time. And I think I was also quite easy to get back into non-league because that's all I knew. That's all I knew. I was 16, I was playing for Welling. So I think in that in itself was an achievement when I was young. So I was like, let's just go back there and play games. And again, like we said, it can then come down to opinions or whatever. And if you get noticed, which is a little bit of pot luck, really.
No, that's really interesting. Not always the best decision to, I guess, go to the top of the table. I'm getting a bit carried away here. I'll try and speed things up a little bit. Wanted to touch on your time in Scotland at Inverness, I think it was. And I've got to admit, I didn't know who Terry Butcher was before this morning. I did recognise the picture of him and sort of his like blood-stained thing. But quickly, just what was that experience like? What was he like as a manager?
Yeah, that was. I was gutted because he brought me in. He actually brought me in the year before, and I was training with him, but I couldn't get international clearance done. There was a rule where I'd signed for 2 clubs in England, and you can't then sign for a club in Scotland. You can do 1 club, then 1. So I'd been at Ebbsfleet that year in the Conference Prem. Inverness had come and watched me. Then to get game time in between, I signed for Maidstone just to get the game while I was trialling with Inverness and training up there. And they wanted me straight away. And then because of that signing for Maidstone, it meant I couldn't sign that year. So I was still up there training. So it felt like I was there longer than what I actually was. And he was brilliant the whole way through. And then straight away the next year I was involved. I think I started on the bench the first 3 games, and then I started the 4th, and then I was on the bench the 5th, started the 6th. You know, it was a good run of games for Scottish Premier League football. And then while we were on a high, I think we were sitting 3rd in the division, which is obviously, you got Celtic at the time, Aberdeen, can't compete with them. So we were in a position that was probably the best that we could ever be fighting for. And he then left to go to Hibs. And again, like we touched on earlier, John Hughes as a manager came in and completely different for me. It didn't work out for me. It wasn't a case of me and him having an argument or anything of the sort. He came in, he had his players. I wasn't one of his players, and you just get filtered out. And I was, like we were saying earlier, like Quaresma was at Inter Milan. I was just outskirts training day by day, never playing any football. And because I had such a good relationship with Terry Butcher, he was just it's just so much respect for him. And he was all about a good changing room. And that's something that to this day you have to have in football. And it's something completely will abide by when I go into management, and something that the managers, especially someone like Andy Drury now, Jay Saunders, Flan and Coyley, when I play, they were all about a good change room. They knew if you got 1 bad egg, 2 bad eggs, that can disrupt absolutely everything. So it's all, at the end of the day, they're almost like your family for that season. You see them so much, especially if it's full-time football. You spend your whole lives with them. So if you've got a tight-knit group that are going to work hard for each other, it's going to work. And that's what Terry Butcher then wanted to take me into Hibs the following season. And then right at the end of the season, he got fired. So it's funny how like football can work like that. It's a bit of luck. Again, I might still be playing in Scotland if he was still there. But I ended up in a position where I had a manager that I wasn't part of his plans, and the manager that was part of his plans didn't have a football club. So again, you sort of go back to square one again, and you go back to what you know.
What's really coming across to me here is why so many ex-players are starting to go into management like Rooney and Lampard, because just from this conversation, I can tell how having these top coaches really, really like, you know, it translates into yourself as a manager. Like, it makes sense to me now, because you always get these people saying, oh, like he's a player, he shouldn't be a manager, but it's definitely a sort of transferable route, if you like.
It is, and that's one thing. You can do your coaching badges, and someone can teach you how to coach, but until you've seen someone, I personally, until you've seen someone coach you, and it doesn't have to be at the top level, at absolutely any level. As soon as you've seen someone coach you, you can be not inspired by them, but you can take things on from them for a positive and negative. I think that's the biggest learning curve. I've had managers who've have done things wrong in terms of the way they do the team talk, the way they announce the team, the way they set the warm-ups up, just all little things. You take the positives from one and you remember the negatives from the other to make sure that you don't do what you thought was terrible. So I do think, it's unfair in some ways that you see people like Frank Lampard getting the job at Chelsea and things, even though for me, he is a Chelsea legend. We've all seen him be a Chelsea legend, but it is one of those, there's these coaches out there that have done this, but he's been coached by Mourinho. He's been coached by some of the best managers in the world. He's probably got, is that not as much, if you were to go into a job interview, is that not as much of a background as it is of doing your coaching badges and having said you've coached someone for 5 years? And for me, I think it is, because taking everything on from them, I feel like I'm ready to do it. And even if I'll go and work for more managers like Andy Drury at the moment and any others in the future, you should do the same thing from them. Just take on the positives and the negatives.
Definitely. Just quickly, I know you acted as Ronaldo's like sort of body double for a little bit. What did that actually entail, and what was that experience like?
It was funny because I was doing a lot of stuff at the time for Mike Delaney, he's got a select sport artist that does all his choreography. Basically gets a lot of football adverts, and you get the opportunity to body double for him. But we were working this out the other day. I think I've done Ronaldo, Ozil, Gareth Bale, Van Persie, and all it is that you're doing. I've actually done Diego Costa. That was the funniest one because possibly one of the ugliest people in football. But it's quite funny because all you actually do is footwork and long ball. They're never going to show your face because if you're doubling for them, that's when they've done wrong. They want you to look reasonably like them or have the similar sort of build in terms of like the way that your legs move or whatever. But other than that, it's like they can't afford to pay Ronaldo all the money to be there for 6 hours. So they'll get all the face shots that they need of Ronaldo. And whenever you see an advert and it's just feet, it's never going to be them. It will never be anything that they're doing. So because they can't afford to pay their time, so they'll pay someone else who doubles for them, who obviously can do the tricks or whatever. But I think the best one I had was Ozil. I did Ozil for about 3 years, and actually it got to the properly saying hello to each other. It wasn't just like Ben, Ozil, do you know what I mean? Like meeting. That's what it was like with Ronaldo. But the biggest one with Ronaldo was I was just in awe of him because at the time I based everything on Ronaldo. I was a huge CR7 fan at the time. And just seeing him, and I was lucky that I got to meet a young Ronaldo that just had. He was at the advert for 4 hours, which is just unheard of within footballers. So he had that attitude. I can't imagine he'd do that now because he doesn't have that sort of time to with everything that he's got going on, family as well. But it was actually something that it popped up the other day. Mike gave me a message 3 weeks ago. Said, "Would you be about now Ronaldo's back in England to do a body double for him?" And my initial instinct was that mean I'm going to have to shave my beard off. So it didn't come about in the end because I think he's had someone that's been doing it for him for the last sort of 4 or 5 years in Spain and Italy. But that was a question I had to ask myself. I've had the beard for about 4 years now. Is Ronaldo, am I that much of a Ronaldo fanboy that I'm going to get rid of it for him?
Oh, I can't. I've seen you on the Most Wanted. You got your spiky hair. You got the cut socks.
Yeah.
Like a beard's nothing.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk a little bit about non-league. Obviously, the captain at Margate now. Do you feel like non-league it has that reputation as a sort of a dirty and long ball type of thing, where like skillful players like you can really thrive?
I do, and then at the same time, I definitely do because if you look at, I think it's more of an age thing. I think when they're younger, like we obviously, you might know Martial, who we took him from Dartford to
Fulham.
Yeah, he was someone that just showed so much flair and so much liveliness that he was always going to get picked up. I probably didn't come into non-league early enough to then jump back out, if you know what I mean. I feel like I've done very well within non-league, and I've been absolutely happy with that, and I've loved it, and I've loved all the time at the clubs I've been at. But I don't think I was ever quite in the position where I was like, you're 19 and you're doing it there, because I was sort of at 19, I was Italy or Scotland. So there definitely is the opportunity to thrive, but then at the same time, there still is some bad pitches in non-leagues. Like I think the station of being physical and things is dying, because a lot of clubs are looking to play, and a lot of clubs are like paying a lot of money. You can be 2 divisions below us and earning a full-time wage. So I think this is what people don't understand, that the standard of English football. You could say to someone, when I was talking to some of the Italian boys recently, that technically I'm now playing step 8 of football, which sounds like terrible. If you look at it from their point of view, that's like such a low division. But in England, there's still full-time clubs within that division. Sorry, we're step 7, I think. We're step 7. But anyway, but you're playing at step 7 of football, but there's still full-time footballers within that division making good money. There's still so much money from every club. So you don't realise actually how lucky we are as a country to have so many options of football clubs. And the biggest one now is the Conference South, which I've probably spent 200 games playing in. You look at some of the clubs, like you'll know of Dartford, like just how big of a club that is, like, and how well run of a club that is, and how much money can be behind it if it needs to be. And I just think that's the one thing that non-league is good for. You don't actually, a lot of people don't realise how many good football clubs and how much money is floating about in it, and how much of a live. Sort of, if you're staying at that level, you're still doing well to stay at that level, because so many players drop out and drop down and drop down. Then they're playing Kent League and they're picking up £20 a week, whereas you're there at the moment without coming across arrogant. At the end of the day, my football all the way till 30 is paid for my mortgage, paid for, do you know what I mean, all sorts of stuff, and it still does. So there's something that I take a bit of pride in that. But at the same time, it's still what I feel is a brilliant level, because I'm playing in front of 400 or 500 fans at Margate every week who are brilliant fans. So I get an absolute kick out of it. There's no level of playing before the money. I've never done that. And it's never been a case of just playing for the sake of playing. I do it because I enjoy it. The fans are brilliant. You get a good camaraderie with the fans before and after the game, which I don't think is something you quite get at full-time football. So for me, like, the league's absolutely taken me in and eaten me up, but it's definitely something that I'm in awe of, really, of how well it works and how many good football clubs are within it.
And it's definitely, like, especially across the last 10 years, I think it's come a long way, because we had Jack Holland on a couple of months ago. I'm not sure if you do know.
I used to play. I was in the district team with Jack.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's quite. We played together, I think, years 7 and 8. So we've always kept in touch.
Oh, there we go.
But yeah.
So he was at Bromley for 7 odd years. He's actually just come back in their sort of like gym department. But he was talking to me about when he was first there about 10 years ago. They'll be training in the park, or they'll be training on an Astro behind the pitch that was waterlogged with about 5 people. And now you see all these players like Marshall, Ollie Tanner from Lewes, getting picked up. So I think non-league is definitely starting to get the recognition it deserves.
Yeah, definitely. And that's step 7 clubs being approached by Championship and Premier League clubs. So that's crazy when you actually look at it. It is getting a recognition, and it is definitely a higher level than I think some people believe. And probably what it used to be is it's getting even better every year. Even better every year. Even you look at the leagues below now and what's going on in them leagues. It's absolutely crazy, but it's good to be a part of.
100%. So Dartford and coaching as a sort of whole, we mentioned obviously the coach you played under, but what made you sort of get into a coaching role?
I think I was always going to do it, to be honest. And I think it might even be something that I probably didn't push on enough as a player, because I was eager to get into coaching. There were opportunities where I could have stayed full-time, but I went into part-time football so that I could coach as well, because I knew it was something that I was going to later on in life go on to. So it's something I always knew I was going to do. It's something I enjoyed doing. Enjoyed giving back, sharing experiences, like we said, offering as much advice as possible. And definitely Dartford seems to have been the best place I could ever have lined up with. Obviously, it came through as a player originally, and it works better now that I'm probably not a player there. because actually I can just focus on what I'm doing with the academy players and not actually myself within the club. It's just what I can do with the academy team and the academy players. And we've built there. Well, sort of when we went in, Darren Ibrahim was a really good coach, who's Gillingham goalie coach. He was running it, and he wanted to get it to the level I believe we've probably got it to. He then got a really good opportunity. I think at the time it was either to go into Charlton. I think it was to go into Charlton at the time. So it would have been interesting to work with Dell for a little bit longer and see where we could have taken it. But I think he'd agree that we've sort of taken it to the level that he probably had ambitions for, and that we've got the ambition for now. Is we took it from where it was, Dartford were quite good. They were coming 5th or 6th in the league, but a couple of players might be getting produced, but they were never really the team to talk about. Whereas now I believe we're the team to beat. We're the ones that will be at the top of the table every season. Hopefully every season. We have been for the last 3 seasons. And also take massive pride in seeing players and helping players go to other clubs or get within the first team, which is looking like it's going to happen more of now. Go to either other clubs or within the first team and it working for them. I think if we actually, I'm going to try and work out the stat and I'll let you know once I do, but how many players in the last 5 years from Dartford Academy are playing within non-league, and it would be a very high number. Just because I think we've got that credibility where even now I get managers texting me and say, do you have this position? I say yes, and they'll trust it straight away because he's been within Dartford Academy. And they also probably trust my opinion that I'm not going to go and send them a player that isn't good enough or isn't ready. So it's definitely a good position to be in as a coach at the moment, and it's something that I'm looking to every year keep progressing, keep getting more players in, keep pushing them on as much as possible. And while I'm playing still, it's the perfect sort of position to be in. I don't need to be a first team manager yet. I feel like I've got plenty of playing. So that's my whole focus. Obviously, when it comes to managing, I then have decisions to make whether we do this and that and so on. But for the moment, I get to put my whole full-time focus into that, which is working well at the moment.
Another thing that definitely comes across to me about the academy is sort of the closeness and unity between the players, because I've obviously played with, boys from throughout, even the guys that are leaving at Corinthian, and you can tell like they're a group of mates at the end of the day, like being around each other every single day and being in a good environment that fosters that definitely translates into results on the pitch.
Yeah, definitely. That's what we were saying earlier, when you, like you said, you see them like your family because you're training with them all day, every day. So that's absolutely massive, really, because imagine going into a workplace and not enjoying it. You wouldn't want to do it. So you're going into the workplace. We keep it fun. We keep it energetic. We push them as hard as we can. I say we're quite demanding, but the thing is, if a player buys into that, you really sort of relish how well that they can progress themselves. Whereas if you're pushing players and they don't buy into it, it then goes the other way. And there will always be players that happens to, but it's never going to be a case of we push them in a direction that we don't want them to go. We'll still help everyone out and we'll make it a good environment. And then I think, like we said, if they've got that respect for you from there and they buy into everything you do, it is really good. And I think everyone that, I'll admit I get to experience it every year, but for the boys that only do it for 2 or 3 years, I think they go, that probably was the best time of their lives and things. I think you'll know the one thing we struggle with is education. We can't, and it's still a fine line, and that's why we didn't get you in, because, and I was similar myself. I did A-levels when I was younger, so I think that's the fine line that football and education between themselves, not between Dartford, need to get right, because you'll know, like, A-levels is hard work, and full-time training is hard work. So is it possible to do full-time training 10 till 1 and then full-time education 1 till 5? Possibly, but that would absolutely drain the life out of everyone. So there's definitely something within football, because you miss out on players every year.
Yeah, it's definitely not possible if it goes like Jack Peters, but last 2 or 3 questions. How was it winning? I mean, you won the Kent Academy Cup with 2-year groups this year. How was it winning with the outgoing year group that obviously you've overseen the development of for 3 years?
Yeah, that was, to be honest, quite emotional, really. I know it's academy football, and our main objective is to make them into players, which I believe is what we've done. But they deserve to show something, because that was the first year that they started, was the first year I took over as academy manager. I'd been the coach before, and we really pushed it on to go, you know what, we want to start winning. We want to start pushing players to a new level. And they all bought into that. And they've been absolutely brilliant throughout. And actually, the first year got to February, they were top of the league by an absolute mile. And then COVID happened and they scrapped the league for them. So they never got that to happen. The second year, won every single game in the league, got scrapped in November, December. Didn't get the league again. So they had 2 COVID year groups of where we probably would have won the league, and the opportunity to that. And then this was their 3rd year. So this was their final. And obviously at the end of last year, when we just came out of COVID, Kent Academy Cup, we won all 7 games in the league, went into the final and lost in the final against Dover, which was, for the boys that went out that year, that was hard, because that's all they had to show for their time at Dartford Academy. Was 2 COVID years where we actually ended up getting nothing for it. But like I said, the biggest thing was they've gone on and progressed, and we've got 4 or 5 of those boys playing history in South football, which is a good level, getting money to play, or just playing at that level, which is absolutely amazing for now, 19, 20 years old. So that's the biggest win. And then obviously this year, it was like all the boys bought into the fact we needed something to happen. We came 2nd in the league. We didn't win the league. And I think, as much as I think Eastleigh were brilliant, who did win the league, they were very good. I don't want to take credit away from them, but at the same time, we never had the same team every week, because, like I said, we were doing things properly and we were sending players out on loan. So we had a game on a Wednesday and one of our boys had played 90 minutes the night before, so we couldn't play him. We still then showed our depth throughout the season to be able to come 2nd and to be able to beat all the other teams other than Eastleigh. But we just didn't quite have that same team week in, week out, which you would normally have, because all of our boys, like even with Sam Adaudu, who's our academy club captain and is now with the first team, his 2nd first team contract, we barely had him all season. Martial went off to Fulham. So the positives are they've done better from it. We don't have anything to show regarding the League Cup. And that's when it came down to Kent Academy Cup. And we were like, boys, this is your last moment with us. First of all, just enjoy it and let's see if we can get something out of it. And obviously that was a big occasion. And you could see in the boys' faces when they played in that game how much it meant to them. It's the best performance I've ever seen from Dartford Academy since I've been there. They were just, every single player was unbelievable. And because of that, so many managers have been messaging me asking what this guy's doing about every single player. Normally it's like they might message you about one player. That every single player had a message from someone that they were interested after that game. So I think absolutely credit to them. And did they get what they deserved after 3 years? Winning a trophy, yes, but I think they deserved a lot more trophies for what they did. But quite emotional because, yeah, like I said, they're finished with us, but looking forward to helping them and watching them go into the real life of football.
Great. I hope not too many spoilers there. I think Fred's going to use a few bits from this on his final episode. Last question, quite a fun one to end off with. Out of all the players you played with and against, 5-a-side team, this is going to blow every single one we've had out of the water, I'm sure.
Lovely players. Yeah, let's try and make sure we get the perfect ones. 5-a-side. Because I probably would put, if it was an 11-a-side, I'd put Steve King in from Concord, because all I used to do was hang the ball up and he had the biggest head in football that he just scored 20 goals a season. But if it's 5-a-side, he definitely doesn't get in. If we go 5-a-side, I'll probably have to go, am I playing myself or not?
Your decision. If you think you're better than Vieira or...
Definitely not, but I still want to play. So I'm going to play with them. I'd go, so Zanetti, I'll keep just two from Inter, Zanetti and Vieira, two players out on. I'll probably have at the back Lewis Dunk, someone that was me and him were together in the sort of the reserves at the time, the under-23s at Brighton, really close. And he's absolutely gone on to a new level. And obviously, I think deserved an England call-up, really. But captain of Brighton and absolutely on fire at the moment. So Lewis Dunk, and I'll put Harry Kane up top. A lot when we were young, and I'll be honest, he wasn't very good.
Really?
And now he's the best forward probably in the world. He's, I think, the biggest one with him, he got lucky, didn't he? He got lucky. He went out on loan a few times, wasn't working at Tottenham. He got lucky that there was no Tottenham player to play, and he played and he scored. Since then, that again sums up how football is. I'm saying he was bad. He can't be bad because he's probably the best centre forward in the world. So at that time, he wasn't as highly rated as what's happened. So we just need a goalie now. We've got me on the right. No, we have me on the left. Zanetti on the right. Vieira through the middle. Kane up top. Oh no, I've done
more than five. Go on. What are you saying?
I'll just go and goal.
Yeah.
I'm watching them play. That's terrible maths. That proves why I ended up stopping mine and doing football. Goalkeeper wise, I've played with a few really good goalies, but I think I'll go back to Dell. I think Dell would be, and he's quite small as well, so he wasn't good enough for 11-a-side football, so he'll be good enough for 5-a-side. But no, he was in terms of a goalie. I played with him when we were young. I played with him for Kent when we were young, and obviously Corinthians, and also Dartford as well. And I think even a spell maybe at Maidstone. So he had the perfect kick, which makes a big difference. Someone that could just absolutely zing one to where you want it to be. And obviously in a 5-a-side goal, I think he'll be a little bit more agile than he is in an 11-a-side goal.
There we go. Probably the first time Corinthians and Maidstone have been mentioned in the same sort of sentence as Vieira, but there we go. Last quick thing. What are your ambitions going forward as a player and a coach?
Ambition as a player now is, and I think it sums up from staying with Margate this year, is just to be a bit more cemented with Margate. I haven't jumped about clubs for the sake of jumping about clubs. It's normally following the manager. So it looks like I've gone from one club to here each year, but it's normally because a manager leaves there and I want to trust in that manager. That's the biggest thing that I've always put across is, like we said earlier, if a new manager comes in, it might not work. But for now, it's for playing wise, help out Margate as much as possible, get them back to where they want to be as a club, whether that's in the conference or just as a club, be a little bit more sustainable with things going on. I want to help out with that. And put myself, in a position where maybe I've played 200 games for Margate, and then obviously look at where I'm at from there. I still believe my body can keep going for another 10 years, but I'm sure that only time will tell. And then coaching-wise, keep doing what we're doing at Dartford, keep progressing players. That's just the main aim at the moment, just progress players. And then obviously when the time comes, at the moment I'm doing quite a lot with Margate anyway on that side of things. When the time comes, obviously jump into that managerial / coaching position. But obviously, I think the biggest thing there is when the time's right. As I know so many people who have said playing manager is difficult, something that I probably believe I will go into. So again, you'll have to work out the level of football that I'm going to do that at. And also at the same time, you don't want to just jump straight into management because you've only got certain time to play. You've got the rest of your life to manage, technically, obviously not when you're too old, but you rest of your life to be able to do the other side of the game. So just taking it by year, I think, year by year at the moment.